On the morning of the 29th of September 1957, a chemical explosion tore through a nuclear waste storage tank in the southern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. The blast scattered 80 tons of radioactive material across hundreds of square miles. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated. Villages were bulldozed. A river was poisoned. And for 32 years, the Soviet government told the world absolutely nothing. What were they hiding? And why did it take until 1994 for the city at the center of it all to appear on any map? Rewind to 1945. The United States has just dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and the Soviet Union understands something with cold clarity. It is now in second place in a race that has no rules. Joseph Stalin gives the order. The USSR will build its own nuclear weapon faster than anyone thinks possible, at any cost. The problem is infrastructure. The Soviet Union has uranium deposits, brilliant physicists, and a vast pool of forced labor. What it does not have is a place to assemble the weapon in secret, hidden from American reconnaissance, hidden from its own population, hidden from history itself. The solution is the closed city, a settlement that exists in every physical sense: roads, schools, hospitals, apartment blocks, a cinema but carries no name on any official map. Mail is routed through a numbered postal code. Residents receive a special internal passport. Leaving requires written permission, and telling anyone on the outside where you live is a criminal offense. By the early 1950s, there are dozens of these cities across the Soviet Union, but one of them is different. One of them is building the core of the entire Soviet nuclear program. Its name, the name its residents use among themselves, is Chelyabinsk 40. The facility. Construction begins in 1945 on the eastern slope of the Ural Mountains, beside a quiet lake called Ozyorsk. The location is chosen deliberately, remote, surrounded by forest. Accessible only by roads that do not appear on Soviet civilian maps. The facility is called Mayak, the Russian word for lighthouse. The irony is not lost on those who work there. Mayak is designed to be the opposite of a beacon. Its purpose is to remain invisible. By 1948, Mayak is operational. It is the first plutonium production facility in Soviet history. Its reactor, known as Anushka, begins converting uranium into weapons-grade plutonium. The workers call it that Anushka, a woman's name, as if naming it something soft could make it less dangerous. It cannot. The city, Chelyabinsk 40, is built around Mayak, the way a shell is built around a creature completely, seamlessly, with no visible seam between normal life and classified reality. At its peak, around 80,000 people live here. Scientists, engineers, military personnel, their families, support workers. The city has paved streets, a theater, a cultural center, a stadium. It has better food supply than almost any open Soviet city, a deliberate policy to retain skilled workers and maintain silence. Children grow up here without fully understanding what their parents do. Parents work at the facility. The facility produces products. The products are never described. Everyone understands. No one says it aloud. The waste problem. Here is the detail that changes everything. Producing plutonium generates radioactive liquid waste. In the late 1940s, Soviet scientists and engineers understand this is a problem. What they do not have is a long-term solution. What they have is a deadline. Stalin wants a bomb by 1949, and a decision is made that will take decades to unravel. The waste is stored in underground steel tanks, cooled by water, monitored by instruments. The cooling system is the critical variable, and in 1957, the cooling system for tank number 14 fails. No one notices for several months. The 29th of September 1957, 4:22 p.m. Tank number 14 contains roughly 70 to 80 tons of highly radioactive nitrate and acetate waste. Without cooling, the temperature inside has been rising for weeks, possibly months. The chemical reaction accelerates. At 4:22 inches the afternoon, the tank reaches critical temperature. The explosion is not nuclear. It is chemical, a thermal detonation driven by the instability of the waste compounds. but the yield is equivalent to approximately 70 to 100 tons of TNT. The concrete lid of the tank, weighing 160 tons, is thrown into the air. A column of radioactive smoke and debris rises several hundred meters. The plume drifts northeast, following the wind. The first hours, workers at Mayak see the explosion. They feel the shockwave. They do not know what has happened. There is no protocol for this. There is no emergency broadcast. There is no public warning of any kind. A military officer named Gorgi Nedelin is among the first senior personnel to assess the scene. What he finds is a zone of destruction covering the immediate grounds of the facility and a radioactive cloud already moving beyond the perimeter. The decision made in those first hours is the decision that defines the next 30 years. This will not be announced. The plume. Over the following days, the radioactive plume, later named the East Ural radioactive trace, settles across an area of approximately 20,000 square kilometers. It contains strontium 90, cesium 137, and other isotopes. Strontium 90 is particularly dangerous. It mimics calcium in the human body. It settles in bone. It causes leukemia. The plume passes over at least 23 villages. In the immediate aftermath, roughly 10,000 people are evacuated. But the evacuation is not immediate. Some communities are not moved for weeks. One village, Berdianish, is evacuated within a week. Another village nearby is left in place for nearly 2 years, its residents continuing to farm, eat local food, drink from local sources. By October 1957, the Soviet government has constructed an explanation for any unusual activity in the region. There is no explanation given publicly because no public statement is made. In classified communications, the incident is referred to as the accident on the premises of the chemical combine. The KGB issues directives to regional medical officials. Physicians treating patients with symptoms consistent with radiation exposure are instructed to record alternate diagnoses. The word radiation is removed from their permitted vocabulary. Medical records are altered. A Soviet biologist named Zhores Medvedev, working in Moscow, begins hearing fragments of what happened through scientific back channels. He pieces together a partial account. In 1976, from exile in London, he publishes the first public account of the Kyshtym disaster, named after the nearest town that actually appears on a map. Western governments read his account with interest. Several intelligence agencies already have partial satellite data suggesting something occurred in the Urals in late 1957. The CIA has known since 1959. The lake. There is a second catastrophe happening in parallel, slower and quieter, and in some ways more damaging. Between 1949 and 1951, Mayak has been discharging radioactive waste directly into the Techa River, the river that runs through 11 villages downstream and is the primary water source for approximately 124,000 people. The discharge is not accidental, it is deliberate. It is the solution to the waste problem before the underground tanks are built. By the time discharges to the Techa River are significantly reduced, an estimated 2.75 million curies of radioactive material have entered the river system. The Techa feeds Lake Metlino. Lake Metlino feeds a broader watershed. Residents along the Techa River are not told. Some are eventually relocated, many are not. The elevated rates of cancer, leukemia, and birth defects that emerge in these communities over the following decades are documented by local physicians, and then, systematically, for decades, those documents are confiscated. The paper trail disappears, but the bodies remain. 1967, a second disaster. In the summer of 1967, a drought causes Lake Karachay, a Lake Mayak, has been using as a direct radioactive waste dump since 1951 to partially dry out. The exposed sediment on the lakebed contains concentrated radioactive material. The wind picks it up. An estimated 5 million curies of radioactive dust are dispersed across 2,700 square kilometers, affecting approximately 500,000 people. It is, by some measures, the third largest radioactive contamination event in history. There is no announcement, there is no evacuation. Later, Soviet engineers will attempt to solve the Lake Karachay problem by filling it with concrete blocks. The lake still exists today. It is reportedly one of the most polluted places on Earth. Here is what the official record still underrepresents. The Soviet government's decision to suppress the 1957 explosion was not simply bureaucratic cowardice or Cold War paranoia. It was, in part, a calculated scientific decision. Soviet radiation health researchers, some of them operating inside the closed city itself, recognized that the contaminated population along the Techa River and the East Ural radioactive trace represented an unprecedented, long-term data set. Tens of thousands of people, exposed to known quantities of specific isotopes over a defined geographic area over decades. A study population. The Southern Urals cohort, a research database tracking the health outcomes of exposed residents, was established and maintained through the Soviet period. The data it accumulated was genuine, detailed, and largely inaccessible to Western science for decades, not because it was destroyed, but because it was scientifically valuable. It was an asset. The people living downstream from Mayak were not warned because warning them would have ended the experiment. This is not a fringe theory. It is the conclusion reached by multiple peer-reviewed analyses published after the Soviet archives became partially accessible in the 1990s. Chelyabinsk 40 appeared on maps for the first time in 1994, renamed Ozyorsk. The Mayak facility is still operational. Chelyabinsk 40 is often framed as a Cold War story, a story about secrecy, about the Soviet system, about the particular pathologies of a particular state at a particular moment in history. That framing is convenient, because what Chelyabinsk 40 actually demonstrates is something older and less geographically specific. What institutions do when the cost of transparency falls entirely on people who have no power to demand it. The physicists at Mayak were not monsters. Many of them were among the most talented scientists of their generation. The administrators who suppressed the accident reports were not uniquely cruel. They were operating within a system that rewarded concealment and punished disclosure, and they made the calculations that system incentivized. The 124,000 people drinking from the Techa River in 1950 did not know they were participants in anything. They were farmers and villagers living in communities their families had inhabited for generations. They were handed a problem they had no part in creating and given no information with which to protect themselves. Ozyorsk still exists. Its residents still require special permission to enter or leave. The Mayak facility processed nuclear material as recently as 2017. The contaminated zones around Lake Karachay remain fenced and monitored. The city appeared on the map. The consequences never left.